degrees. But I appreciate everybody showing up here today. This workshop will cover this year's speech topics. And I encourage everyone to ask questions. And afterwards, if anybody wants to go through the meat lab, you're more than welcome to do that as well. We'll just kind of gather up here and we'll do a tour afterwards. After all, I'm waiting for the temperature to warm up a little bit before I ride home. It was just too cold to come in this morning on a motorcycle. But nonetheless, I encourage everyone to ask questions. For those of you that may or may not know, if you were born between 1999 and 2003, your speech topic is the history of the country ham. If you are a senior, meaning you were born between 1994 and 1998, yours topic is insects that infest country hams and how to control them. Okay, those are your topics, all right? And we're going to go over each of those. Probably the first one's a little bit more in depth than the second one, but the second one, the senior topic, is just as important. It's always been tradition that the junior topics tend to revolve around questions that I or some of the 4-H agents or the volunteers get, all right? And then the senior topics are a little bit more challenging. Okay, we try to make the seniors think a little bit more. And this, by all means, is not the end all. You can use the internet to further research these topics as well. Jumping right into the junior topic, this is kind of a neat thing. The history of the country ham. Myself and another professor here at UK, we wrote an article about country hams for a journal called Animal Frontiers, and I had done a little bit of research in the history of country hams, and when we started to do this topic or this paper, and part of the topic was the history of the country ham, it was really neat to really dig into it and get into the history of things. And one of the things you come across is nobody can really say for sure that this is the first time we ever took salt, we put it on the hind leg of a pig, and we waited a few months and we had food, all right? Nobody can say for sure when we actually did that, but if you look back into the history, you can see that pigs were first domesticated in 4900 BC. They do know with records that in fossilized remains that pigs were in Europe around 1500 BC. So they've been around for a long, long time. Now, the one thing that they do kind of correlate the two, and there's a really neat quote, salt was used, it was a primary ingredient used to make mummies. And there was a quote in a food history book that says, why can't salt that's used to preserve the dead preserve food for the living? And so there's a lot of people that credit the art of I don't know if you say the art of making a mummy. I don't know if that's the correct phrase of describing that, but a lot of people credit the techniques used to make a mummy used to make dry cured hams and dry cured meats in general. So that's where a lot of folks think that the beginnings of the use of salt as preserving food for the living, so to speak, where it began. We do know with some records in Europe that salt was used to preserve a lot of meats during the Roman Empire. As the Roman Empire was conquering country after country, they realized that the quickest way to conquer a country is to take over their food source. Whereas nowadays you take over somebody's energy source, back then you took over somebody's food source. And so when you're destroying somebody else's food, you better have food of your own. And it became very clear that they could use salt to preserve meats for when they were traveling through Europe and conquering different nations. It's also where the whole concept of canning foods came from as well. The Romans were the first to can food so that they could keep it on their wagons and stuff as they were going through Europe as well. Now, kind of fast forwarding to more modern times, either last year or the year before, the senior speech topic was dry cured hams of the world. And it was very evident with those seniors that we borrowed, or our forefathers came over with the techniques to make those European hams, and we kind of combined those techniques to develop what we call the country ham today. I've heard the term of country ham as the redneck cousin to prosciutto. All right, so I have heard that name before as well. But when you go back and look through the annals of history, you kind of come across the fact that preserving hams became a regional thing, as well as what the pigs that were used, as well as the foods that they ate, became a regional thing. For example, sugar is used a lot in making any type of processed meats. Mainly sugar is added to counteract the harsh flavor of salt. And so England was one of the first ones to say, okay, we're using all this salt, let's do something to kind of counteract that salt. And so you started seeing the York ham in England incorporate sugar into the cure mix to help back off the salt. France didn't use any sugar, they used strictly salt, but they used a particular type of salt. Spain, you've seen the picture here, they realized that the flavor of the meat a lot of times was contributed to the fat. And so they started to do experiments with their pigs, and they got to feeding them acorns, which gave them a totally unique flavor profile. And so even today, the Spanish hams, the Serranos and the Iberian hams come from pigs that have been fed solely acorns. You're starting to see that in those kind of acorn-fed pigs as a artisan type product in the U.S. Italians, well, they didn't have acorns, but they had a lot of waste from making Parmesan cheese and the whey from that, so they started to feed Parmesan cheese waste and the whey from making cheese to their pigs, and it gave those prosciutto hams, and it still today gives them a very unique flavor. So a lot of times the flavor of a ham can go back to what the animal has been fed, and we know that very well today. There's a lot of data out there that indicates that. Germans, they start experimenting with different types of woods. All right, and here's a class interaction part. Germany and beechwood, which gives way to what beverage? Which beverage is beechwood aged out there that comes from Germany? Well, it actually comes from St. Louis now. Their symbol is the great big horse. Beer, but more specifically? Budweiser, yeah, Budweiser is beechwood aged. And that's where a lot of that came from, is their hams were smoked with beechwood. All right? And you start seeing that, today we don't normally think of using beechwood. We normally use hickory to smoke our hams, but we're starting to see a lot of our country ham guys experiment with fruit woods, cherry, apple, pecan, maple, those type of things to smoke their hams and create some unique flavors as well. So we went from using salt to preserve mummies to somebody saying, let's do this for food, to the Roman Empire as they marched through Europe, conquering nation after nation, using salt to preserve meat, to the art of making a ham or making a dry cured product. Started to incorporate things like sugar, what we fed the animal, what type of wood we smoked those animals on there. It's really interesting. So we went from Europe, let's cross the pond, so to speak, and get into the United States. The father of the pork industry in the U.S. is Hernando de Soto. He was a Spanish explorer, and the way it worked out, how Hernando de Soto became the father of the U.S. pork industry, is back when Columbus was sailing across the ocean looking for a new route to the west, so to speak. Queen Isabella encouraged him to take pigs with him on the ship. And so he had these pigs on the ship as he sailed across the ocean. When he came to Cuba, he had a bunch of pigs. He discovered a new land. dropped off some of the pigs because, you know, on a ship, several months, pigs gets a little odorous. All right. So he dropped these pigs off and left them in what's now Cuba. And then he sailed back. Well, Hernando de Soto knew that there was those pigs on Cuba, or what we now call Cuba. That was where he first landed. And he gathered up 13 pigs from Cuba. And then he sailed north of Cuba. And what is north of Cuba? Florida, right? I know everybody's rooting for Florida to lose last night to another Florida team. But as most of us know, as far as the men's basketball tournament goes, it's over with. Nobody cares from here on out. But at any rate, he landed in what we call modern-day Tampa Bay, and he started to explore the New World, so to speak. And he got as far as Georgia before he died. And all the while, he had these pigs that he picked up in Cuba, and he took them with him all the way up into Georgia, and that's why he's credited with being the father of the U.S. pork industry. Now, the really neat thing about pigs is pigs are very adaptive. All right, they were adaptive to the climates in Europe. They are adaptive to the tropical climate in Cuba and Florida. You even see that here nowadays. They can eat a variety of feedstuffs and thrive. And so they were very prolific. And so it didn't take long for the Native Americans to see this new animal that had been introduced to them. And, you know, pigs are pretty harsh on the environment because they do a lot of rooting and stuff. And so Native Americans, being close to Mother Nature, so to speak, started to harvest these pigs, and, well, they tasted pretty good. They tasted pretty good. And so they also learned preserving techniques, or they had their own preserving techniques. And when the colonists came over to Jamestown and they were starving, a lot of them had forgotten how to cure ham, so to speak. And so the Native Americans taught them to make hams with what they call magic white sand or salt. And so this is how we kind of got the whole concept introduced into the U.S. The pigs became the concept of the country ham. What we now, you don't really see the term country ham appear in literature until about the early 1900s, but the dry cured ham got to be something of a delicacy. You know, the settlers in Jamestown cured a lot of hams, traded them for, sent them back to England to be traded for coffee, tea, molasses, rum, spices, other foods like that. So hams became a barter tool in Jamestown. What was really interesting is when you get out in the East, obviously since pigs were so prolific and they were very common, they became a major food source. Well, you don't want pigs roaming around your city. They don't smell very good. They root up a lot of things. And so the people of New Amsterdam decided, hey, let's gather up all these pigs that everybody loves to eat. Let's build a wall and keep them behind this wall. And this is where we're going to raise our pigs. Well, you know, that worked for a while, but then they got too crowded. And so it got to be, well, we need to move these pigs out other places. You know, people are starting to move away from New Amsterdam, and so people were taking pigs with them where they went. And so that wall and that kind of big pen that was created was no longer needed. So it was tore down, destroyed, the wall was. But to pay homage to the wall, they built a street where the wall once stood, and they called it Wall Street. And it's still called Wall Street today. So I bet none of you woke up this morning thinking you never understand where the term Wall Street came from, did you? So there's a lot of things that relate back to the pig, all right? Pork barrel spending, living high off the hog, things like that go back to the pig. As the settlers in New England started to send their hams back to Europe, trading them, they became all the rage, all right? became very evident that the New World, so to speak, had a climate that was perfect for producing a very nice, very flavorful ham. And so they became the rage in Europe. In fact, Queen Victoria sent word to the colonists, I want at least 6 of these a week, so that she could serve in the palace. So settlers in New England, using the pigs that Hernando de Soto introduced to the continent with the techniques that the Indians taught them, developed a product that was pretty high value back in Europe. And this is how our ancestors made a living, so to speak. Now, how we get to where we are today is kind of an interesting thing. Typically, like I said earlier, pigs are good scavengers. They can eat anything and thrive. So they are normally, traditionally, they were raised through the summer. You know, a lot of the sows had litters in the spring. It doesn't take long for a pig to get to weight, 6-7 months nowadays, even shorter than that. And so winter comes, well, the pigs can't scavenge. And so it became evident to the farmers that, well, if we harvest the pigs in wintertime, then we don't have to feed them through the winter. We just have to feed the sows and the breeding stock through the winter. And so the young pigs were harvested in the wintertime, and then that's when they realized this is the time we can make hams, and they dry cure the hams. And so the hams and shoulders, you know, we don't think about shoulders being dry cured, but they are as well. And those hams, about the time they would be ready for consumption, was around Easter time. So in that December, January time period, when they were starting to slaughter pigs and make hams, the first available hams ready for consumption would always seem to be around Easter. And so that's where the tradition of the Easter ham, as most of you are probably thinking about tomorrow and Easter and the big dinners that you're going to have. Most of you are going to have ham for dinner, and you can kind of contribute, our settlers, our ancestors, to that. And so that's where the term Easter ham came from. All right. Some were saved for Thanksgiving. Some were saved for Christmas dinner. The most flavorful hams, because they were the oldest, were always saved for Christmas. And so the term Easter ham, Christmas ham, that's where that came from. All right. Kind of some neat stuff. Nowadays, the majority of our country hams are made here in the Southeast, with Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina as the major areas of where hams were made. However, if you look back through the annals of history, you can see that not only was Tennessee, Virginia, Kentucky, North Carolina making hams, but you can also see country hams being made in climates that we don't typically think of. Louisiana, Florida, southern Georgia. You can see references in history to those hams being made in those areas as well. We don't normally think of them as having a climate conducive to making a country ham, but they, you know, there was some records that show that they did as well in those climates. And the country ham proved to be something that folks liked. You know, it didn't require refrigeration. A housewife, a farm wife could keep that ham on the table, and as people came in for dinner or snacks, they could just carve off a piece of ham. Biscuit was right there, country ham and biscuits, that's where that got started in the farms. And so it proved to be something of a delicacy and something of convenience as well. The term country ham, I found out my research for this article for New Frontiers, it did not really appear in print. So they just called it a ham. You know, that was a ham. But the term country ham didn't appear until the early 1920s is when you start to see the term country ham put into play there. And that's something I thought was kind of interesting, is we typically say things like country ham, city ham. Well, back in the early 1900s, in 1800s, 1700s, it was just a ham. That's all it was. But the term country ham started appearing in the early part of the 1900s. Smithfield, and even today, Smithfield, Virginia has become known as the home of the country ham. And part of it with Smithfield was the Virginia farmers raise a lot of tobacco. You know, and we in the Commonwealth here raise a lot of tobacco as well. And a lot of folks that raise tobacco know that, you know, tobacco is a very demanding of the soil, and so it would deplete a lot of nutrients. And so much like in the Midwest where I come from in Illinois, you plant corn in this plot this year, next year you plant beans, you plant corn, beans, corn, beans, corn, beans, you rotate things in and out. And that's kind of what Virginia farmers did as well, as they plant tobacco. Tobacco would deplete the nutrients in the soil, so they would come back and plant peanuts as a way of replenishing the nutrients in the soil so that the next year they could plant tobacco, rotational cropping. And so Virginia became known as a peanut state as well. And so when they would go in and harvest the peanuts, it was typically by hand. You don't always get all the peanuts, and so it became commonplace, well, to get all the peanuts out of there as a way of feeding the pigs, we just churn the pigs loose in there, let them root up and get the peanuts out of the ground. And so all of a sudden it started to be, a thought hit a lot of these folks. These pigs that rooted all these peanuts, they kind of tasted unique, much like the acorn-fed pigs and the Parmesan cheese-fed pigs back in Europe. And so the Smithfield ham was born. The Smithfield country ham was born from that notion. And in 1926, Virginia was starting to see their beloved Smithfield ham being copied and duplicated, or forged, if you will. And so they decided, and you see this even today, they decided to lay down some laws about what a Smithfield ham is. And so by law, in 1926, the Virginia State Assembly declared that if you're going to call yourself a Smithfield ham, the pigs must come from Virginia. They must be processed and fed in Smithfield, Virginia. They can only eat Virginia peanuts. And so peanut-fed pigs must be harvested, cured, processed in Smithfield, Virginia to be called a Smithfield ham. Okay? Do you see Smithfield hams out there today? Yeah. Do you think it's this Smithfield ham? No, it's not. It's not. It's not. What happened was, as technology advanced and the process of harvesting peanuts got better, pigs there wasn't many peanuts left for the pigs to root through and get, and so it was, I think, in the I think it's about the 1960s or so, this kind of fell out of practice because advances in technology and peanut harvesting. But back then, you know, this was what you had to do to call yourself a Smithfield ham. And we see that today. You see a lot of companies and states declaring that if you're going to be Kentucky proud, you're going to have to do this. All right? You know, this is what Kentucky proud is. So we see this kind of branding even today, and it's nothing new. You can see it goes back to even late 20s, mid to late 20s. Now, this is a fun story. I get this question a lot, all right? Folks ask me, well, I get this question at State Fair, how long is this going to last, all right? So at the end of the fair, end of the ham competition at the fair, I see this family and this 4-H'er with this ham, and they're holding it like this, and everybody's tired because it's been a long day, and it's even been longer for us that run the thing as well. And a parent comes up and says, how long is this ham going to last? How long is it going to be good? All right? Well, it's good for a long time. All right? Got to realize we use the techniques to make a mummy to make a ham. All right? And I usually tell folks this story. I tell them the story about Mr. Guat Lee's Pet Ham. All right, there's two kind of schools of thought of where this ham came from. All right, and you can go to the Isle of Wight Museum in Smithfield, Virginia, and you can see Mr. Guat Lee's Pet Ham. One story goes that Mr. Guat Lee, he sold Smithfield hams. All right, and one story says that they loaded up the wagon to go deliver hams, and this ham fell off. Another legend to the story is they emptied the barn, and when Mr. Guat Lee went up there to double check, there was this lone ham that they'd forgot, and he was hanging right there. But what everybody agrees on is what Mr. Guat Lee did next, is he decided to say, hey, I wonder how long this is going to last. And so he took this ham in the 1920s. It was cured in 1902, and in 1920 he took this ham with him everywhere, and everybody asked him what it was. And so in 1920 he put a brass ring on it with a tag that said just simply Mr. Guat Lee's Pet Ham, and he carried this ham with him all over the place. And it cured in 1902. This is Mr. Guat Lee here. He was a meat processor, by the way. He not only sold Smithfield hams, but he made them. He was a meat processor. And in fact, there is a Guat Lee meat processor still today. You can go buy Guat Lee sausage, and it goes back to Mr. Guat Lee here. Here's the brass ring that's put on there that says Mr. Guat Lee's Pet Ham. Here's what it looks like today. All right. He got accidentally put in refrigeration for the first time in his entire life about 10 years ago when a hurricane was coming through, and they were trying to rescue all the displays, and somebody says, hey, this is meat that needs to be in the refrigerator, and he was in refrigeration for about 2 hours. First time in 100 years. All right, so there he sits right there. Nice little glass case that he sits underneath, and technically he's still edible. Might require a hell of a lot of chewing, but he's still edible. All right, and it's been what, 110, 111 years since he's been cured. All right, so they last a long time as far as being good. Now, edible, as far as having a pleasant eating experience, I wouldn't suggest 100 years or so. All right, we had a ham downstairs in the meat lab that, kind of like what the story goes, it was one that we didn't sell, and he got to be 2 years old, 3 years old. And we said, well, he's still good, but nobody's going to eat him. And so we kept him as a doorstop until the USDA made us throw him away. So he was about 5 years old. He made a good doorstop. I mean, it's better than the concrete block we have now. I mean, it was, you know. But nonetheless, that's Mr. Guat Lee's Pet Ham. Now, most of you, I have a lot of stories about 4-H'ers and their hams. And I had a story that I pass on to some folks, and it's been a few years since and a parent told me this. They called me up and they said, you know, we really enjoyed the ham project. It was a good learning experience. We got our 2 hams. We didn't want to eat both hams, and so we had some family in Michigan. So we boxed up our extra ham, sent it to our family in Michigan. The ham arrived in Michigan, it had mold on it, and they threw it away. Okay? Most people in the South, when a country ham has mold on it, that's a good beginning. Okay? It's no big deal. They wash it off and they still eat it. But once you get out of the Southeast, the whole concept of a country ham is very, very foreign to people. What do you mean this isn't refrigerated? What do you mean I don't have to refrigerate this? This is meat. Meat has to be refrigerated, all right? This is a throwback to the way meat was preserved before mechanical refrigeration, folks. This is how our forefathers preserved meat before mechanical refrigeration. But nowadays, when you say the term ham, or you say the word ham, people think of what we in the Southeast refer to as the city ham. All right. This is just the ingredients and a few more that we would use to make a country ham, dissolved in water, injected into that ham, put through a tumbler to even out the brine or the pickle, put in a smokehouse, and within about 6 to 8 hours, I've got a ham. Whereas the country ham takes several months to make a country ham. And so even though a ham is still fairly popular, most people associate ham with what we would call city ham. But people are starting to get into food, all right? And they're wanting to learn more about food, and they're wanting to explore different foods. And believe it or not, the country ham is making a comeback. When you talk to our ham producers, and not only in Kentucky, but nationwide, you're going to hear them say that sales keep going up, sales keep going up. We're shipping hams to places we never shipped hams before. And so it's making a comeback. And so what you, as 4-Hers, what you are learning is not only learning about food and learning about how to make a country ham, but in my mind, you're learning about your history, your heritage, because the phrase country ham is indicative to the Southeast. And to me, country ham is one of those foods that identifies Kentucky, much like horse racing and bourbon and basketball. A lot of people, when you talk about food, the words burgoo and country ham come to mind when people talk about Kentucky. So you're learning about your heritage. All right? Questions on that? Yes, sir.
What's the difference between a country ham and a city ham?
What's the difference between a country ham and a city ham? Excellent question. The city ham is what we call a wet cured ham. The country ham is a dry cured ham. So all those ingredients back in January that you rubbed on that ham, that's the dry cure. To make it a wet cure or city ham, I would take those ingredients plus a few others and I'd dissolve that in water and inject it into the ham. Whereas the country ham, you're allowing those ingredients to naturally penetrate that ham. All right, and when we take a tour of the meat lab afterwards, if you want to, I'll show you the machine that we use to inject that wet cure into the ham. All right, and so the classical definition of a city ham is a wet cured, country ham is a dry cured. The dry cured country ham takes several months to make. The city ham takes a few hours to make. And, you know, we also refer to the city ham as an everyday ham.